Hello everyone and welcome to my newest video, which is going to be about Hume and Descartes, or Descartes and Hume if you want to put it in chronological order, two early modern philosophers, and I'm going to be talking about their views on the self or personal identity as they conceived of it, and the substantive difference between their views. So Descartes' way to get out of his starting point of radical skepticism is to notice that the going on of thinking as indubitable, and from that to infer the existence of the thinker, the thinking self, mental substance, as he calls it, res cogitans, which means a thing that thinks. Res is a thing in Latin. So, but he does not infer that from the experience of thinking alone. He has an auxiliary premise which he borrows from scholasticism and ultimately from Aristotle, that an attribute cannot exist without a substance. It adheres in, and since thinking is an attribute exists, there must exist a substance. Now I'm going to read you a quote from Descartes, which talks about this metaphysical premise that I was mentioning here. It is certain that a thought cannot exist without a thing that is thinking, and in general no act or accident can exist without a substance for it to belong to. So I'm here talking about basically, it starts from Descartes' inference, I think therefore I am, where the hidden premise there is that anything that thinks is. So he can conclude from I think, and anything that thinks is that I am, right? So that is sort of a part of his argument, but also the other part is this principle that I mentioned here. And Hume, on the other hand, is a consistent empiricist and wants no premises or principles that are merely assumed and are not justified on the basis of experience. His skepticism about the self, the unified mental substance, can be seen as a derivation from his skepticism about substance in general. We cannot, on the basis of experience alone, ground the belief in the existence of any substance, so we cannot do that in the case of mental substance either, or the self either. Right? I'm going to read you a quote from Hume on the self or mind or mental substance, or the soul or spirit. We have many names for what it boils down pretty much the same thing. Of course, we can have distinctions, but they're not really relevant here for our purposes. He says, what we call a mind is nothing but a heap or collection of different perceptions, united together by certain relations and supposed falsely to be endowed with a perfect simplicity and identity. So Hume describes his episode where introspectively he looks within his own mind, tries to find a self, as it was described by philosophers and by ordinary people. Ordinary people kind of talk about it, but not really explicitly maybe define it. But he tries to find a unified self. He tries to find a mental substance in there, a mind, a thinker, an ego, or the self. And he says that he cannot find that. He can only find this or that perception or emotion or idea or impression or different kinds of mental content. He cannot find a unified self. So we do not have an idea of a unified self because we don't have the impression of a unified self, and ideas are just copies of impressions, so we cannot really have an idea without the impression. So both Descartes and Hume start their exploration of the self with a phenomenological or introspective psychological insight that they have certain ideas, thoughts, or mental contents of other kinds given to them in immediate experience, but the difference is that Descartes pairs this with a metaphysical axiom of no accident without a substance. So there must be a self that thinks, and Hume doesn't adopt this metaphysical axiom, so he doesn't have the same conclusion. So now I'm going to ask you to look at the diagram that is presented on the screen, where I have the two smaller diagrams within the picture. On the left you have the unified self model of the self, which can be ascribed to Descartes, I think, safely. And on the right, you have the self as a bundle or system, which I kind of wanted to represent here using a few circles. Those small circles that you see on the bottom of the left diagram of the left picture represent particular thoughts or ideas or perceptions or other kinds of mental contents that exist within the mind, and the bigger circle on top is supposed to represent that kind of unified self or underlying substance, mental substance, thinking substance, spiritual substance, if you want, which is supposed to ground all of those particular thoughts and experiences, willings, emotions, judgings, and other things that Descartes includes under the concept of thinking or thought. Uh, so that underlying or base level substance that is the self, the thinking self. Uh, the other things, the thoughts and emotions and other things inhere in it, which means that they belong to it. It is in possession of them because it is a substance and they are its accidents or modes or attributes. Well, not necessarily attributes, but there's only one attribute of the thinking substance, which is thinking. But we have a lot of modes, and none of those particular modes are necessary for the existence and continuation of that substance. But the substance needs to have some modes, at least some modes, in order to continue existing. And it's not really specified in advance which kind of modes those need to be. So you can have this thought or this emotion, that emotion, that have some particular thought or emotion in order to exist. And on the right, you have the self as bundle or system, where the self is not really an overarching. You see, you don't have that kind of bigger circle there on top, or it could be placed at the bottom. Maybe if it's like metaphysical metaphor of a base or something like that, or a foundation. It's underlying, so to speak, right? Uh, well, you don't have that kind of instance here. You only have particular perceptions, ideas, emotions, impressions, and other things Hume talks about under mental contents. And you have the relations or the interconnections between those particular ideas or concepts or impressions and whatnot. And they kind of form a system or a bundle, or a bundle is like a group or a heap, like a collection of some particular things or instances. Uh, yes, you only have that kind of system, and you don't have, the identity condition of that system are reducible to the relations between those particular states of mind at any given moment. So, one thing that we can draw from that as a criticism is the following. So, one problem with Hume's bundle theory of the self is that if the self is merely a bundle or system of perceptions or ideas, and the impressions or ideas change and shift all the time, there's nothing, namely no unified entity that survives the change in the ideas themselves, and we have a new self with every modification of ideas, or we are a new person in every different moment of change of our mental states. So yeah, the Humean there may bite the bullet and doesn't need to look at that as a that doesn't need to look at that criticism as a refutation, but can bite the bullet and accept the conclusion that they seem to follow from those premises, and say that yes, we don't really have a identity of the self, strict identity of the self persisting through time and change, but we only have a new modification, or maybe a new temporal part, if you want to put it that way. Well, temporal part, I guess, presupposes an underlying substance, uh, but you have a new state that is in some way connected to the previous states, maybe by virtue of a continuous and gradual change between those states, and perhaps memory that is available to the subject himself of those previous states. So that may be a way to actually bite the bullet and agree with the critics. Yeah, to agree with the critics, like the jokes on them. The theory that really doesn't work against us, but we can use it in our favor. Uh, we can actually accommodate that part of the theory. What is particularly interesting to note here is that Descartes' argument is very similar, at least in his conclusion, if not the method, to the views of the two other great empiricists, Locke and Berkeley, other than Hume, that is, of course, but other than Berkeley. So, in that they too conclude that there must be a self or a spiritual substance, the things inherent or ideas inherent. For Berkeley, those are ideas, and for Locke, they are ideas of material substances. It's not necessarily the material substance inherent in the mental substance, but the ideas of material substance inherent in mental substance. And the very fact that I know that I perceive those ideas or those representations allows me to infer that there is a self on the subjective side of the knowledge relation. So that is kind of their way of proof of the existence of unified self. So they start from the experiential given fact that the ideas or mental contents are seen, or i.e. being perceived or aware of, and since material bodies for Locke and other ideas for Hume, for Berkeley, cannot perceive anything, there must be a conscious being or mental substance that is aware of them. So we also seen that Descartes defines the self as a substance and the mental or spiritual substance of that. Now, for Descartes, substances are one, things, attributes or accidents inhere in or belong to, and two, things that exist independently of everything else. So in the latter sense, only God is truly a substance, but created things are substances insofar as they depend on nothing else except God. So a particular mind exists independently of one matter or bodies and two other minds. So it is safe to assume, or is in principle conceivable, that the mind, the soul, or the self can and does survive bodily death and goes on living afterwards. Now, Hume, I'm say a few more things about Hume. Hume's application of empiricist principles to metaphysics leads him to skepticism on many fronts: induction, causality, morality, substance, and the self. So whether Hume is doing metaphysics here is open to interpretation. One way of seeing metaphysics is as the speculation about matters that go beyond experience, and in this sense, I don't think Hume is doing metaphysics. But it seems he seems sure to write off many traditional philosophical doctrines as false, rather than being more careful and more modest and say that there's something that we have no knowledge about. And that makes me think that he wants to decide and pass on judgment on these questions. Actually pass metaphysical judgments, if you want to put it that way. So he may be seen as an anticipator of Kant's critical turn in philosophy, which he likely inspired, partly at least, where the matters of metaphysical knowledge are to be limited and placed within the bounds of experience, rather than to speculate about the nominal realm of reality as it is in itself, independently of our intuitions of it. So Kant, however, maintained some rationalist principles, and he was perhaps, in that regard, less critical than Hume himself. The application of this to the problem of the self means the parting of ways with the defense that the rationalizations of the common sense views that the philosophers have offered. We are hardwired to believe that we are a unified and a persisting self, even though that doctrine cannot be theoretically justified, I think Hume would say at the end of the day. Okay, so that has been it for this video. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I hope it was interesting, informative, in some degree at least. And until next time, bye-bye. Subscribe, share, comment, like, all those good things. And bye-bye for now.